And Twana, if you would like to do the introduction, and everybody, I'd ask you to keep your microphones muted while Peter is speaking. If you have questions, type them into the chat box, and we'll get started.
All right. Hello, everyone. Attendance today at this online meeting of the Helping Parents Heal group, online group, is voluntary and is for the benefit of learning from and sharing with other parents whose children have passed away. It is understood that our discussions are intended to be confidential and not designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Our mission is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents, giving them support and resources to aid in the healing process. We go a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and evidence for the afterlife in a non-dogmatic way. Affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non-religious background, and allows for open dialogue. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers to allow parents to be informed about many possible ways to heal, to connect with their children, and to learn about the afterlife. The views expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect those of Helping Parents Heal, and ask that you take from the presentation whatever may benefit you personally. The affiliate leaders for the online group are Tracy Susie, who is unable to be with us tonight, Beth West, and Brian and myself. And with that, we're going to turn it over to our speaker tonight, and we will let him introduce himself, I think, and we'll get going.
Hi, everybody. It was good to see all your faces there. Now I can't see you. You can see me. I am Reverend Peter Panagore, MDiv. I have a master's degree from Yale Divinity School in divinity, and I went there and I studied the history of mysticism in order to create a language for myself to comprehend what happened to me when I died. Because at the time, there was no way for me to reach out to discover other people like me. I thought I was alone. And as far as I could tell, that was true. And so I used the tools that were available to me and proceeded to construct a language to think about my experience and a cultural context to hold it in. And so the language that I speak tends toward a Western Christian construct, but it's not exclusive to that. I was ordained in the United Church of Christ. I served 18 years in various pulpits. My spiritual calling in the church was to kick spiritual tush. I went to broken churches and faced terrible things. And because of my experience, I was able to help them. So I'm going to swing back around. I'll end by saying this about that, my introduction. I'm an author. I've got 2 books out, one on near-death experience. I'm a national speaker. My books are published around the world. I just finished 15 years on television as a host, writer, producer of a 91-year-old broadcast that started on AM radio in 1926 in Maine. And in its end times, reached 33 million viewers a year. I produced 1,700 scripts or devotions, 2-minute stories that broadcast on 2 NBC stations in Maine, into New Hampshire, and up into Canada. We were a 501c3 nonprofit. We were broadcast under the charitable largesse of the television station that was owned by a family, and then by 2 families, and then by a corporation, and then by another corporation. And it cost the families and the corporations about $1 million a year in broadcasting and production to keep us on the air, although our budget was much smaller than that, and it was existent on donations. So there came a time when we were passé. And so in the last 4 months, that is what happened. And so now I am working on a new show, a children's television show that I was telling Brian a little bit about. We're well on our way, and 5 years into development, and we hope to bring the same message that I've been speaking for my entire life since this thing happened to me. I've never lost a child. I have lost family, sisters, and people I love, but I understand the difference between what I've gone through and what you've gone through. As it turned out today, there's a missing young man in my community, a kid who was on my little league team, and he's 26 years old now, and he walked off with a gun 6 days ago, and nobody's seen him since. So I spent most of my day today speaking with the mother, who I've known for years. It's a terrible thing that you all suffered, and I can tell you what exists on the other side. I can't help with your pain. I can help you have hope, and I can talk to you about other parents who've talked to me about how their children have visited them post-mortem. So I was a college student. I went on exchange to Montana State University from UMass Amherst. I was an English major. I was escaping my family. My sister had vanished when I was 14, and for a year, we didn't know if she was alive or dead. She eventually sent us a Christmas card every year from parts unknown for most of our life, and broke my mother. She had a nervous breakdown, and it was a terrible thing not knowing and thinking that Andrea was dead. And so I went through something a little similar, but not the same. I escaped my family because of the pain in my house, and I went on exchange to Montana State University. And while I was there, I joined the outdoor club. I was a Boy Scout, mountaineer, National Ski Patrol winter kid. And long story short, for that year, I went ice climbing. I was needing to do something so I wouldn't go home in March for March vacation, and I had a lot of winter experience at that point, and high mountain experience as well. So I was walking by the outdoor club one day, and there was a tag hanging on the wall, and it said partner needed going backcountry skiing and ice caving in Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada in March. And so I talked with this fella. We got along. We had matching skill sets, rather complementary skill sets. He was a lead ice climber. I had never ice climbed. I'd technical climbed, but not done ice. And we both had done quite a bit of backcountry skiing and backcountry snow caving and winter camping. So we went out for a week. We snow caved and had a great time. And we came back in for a one-day ice climb. And on a world climb, famous people from all over the world come to this place. It's called Weeping Wall, and it's south of Jasper and north of Banff, if anybody's familiar with that part of Canada. And I made a calculation mistake in my equipment because I was 21, just turned 21. I was a little excited and too much bravado. And so my choice to not use two axes, but to use a hammer and an axe instead, with the approval of my partner, Tim, because we were both, oh, we can do this, no problem. So that slowed our climb down significantly, so that when we arrived at the top of the climb, everybody else who was climbing that day, and there was a dozen other teams, had descended and were leaving. It was a 600, 500 or 600 foot climb, and we could see down to the bottom and watch them go as the sun was setting. Long story short, we knew that we were going to die if we stayed where we were. Hypothermia began almost immediately as the sun went down. We had no winter gear with us to spend the night up there because it's a day climb, and nobody did. But with the wind and the cold and the wet to our skin, we figured we were going to die, and we better move because we were going to at least try to self-rescue if we were going to die anyway. So we did that through the night with troubles and problems and increasing hypothermia through all the stages, confusion and body heating up and all the rest of it, inability to speak, frostbite. It was a pretty terrifying experience. And we drove ourselves on by willpower digging continually deeper into our reserve of strength that neither of us knew that we had. So on our last rappel, sometime before morning, we were still stuck on the mountain, fighting our way down, and the rope got stuck, and we were harnessed into the granite at that point on clips that were already hammered into the mountain and straps that were attached to the clips permanently, attached to my harness and attached to my partner's, and he was to my left. And the rope was up around the corner in a dark crag area. At the top of this crag, 150 feet up, was an iron ring, and the iron ring had the rope through it. And I had tied one end to my harness and tossed off the other end in order to haul it through. But the rope jammed on the first pull, and we were stuck, and it was hours. And we came to the conclusion at some point at night, I came to the conclusion that I was going to die there, because I had already become hot, and I had already unzipped my coat because I didn't see what difference it was going to make. I knew that was a sign of hypothermia, but I didn't really care. Plus, my mind was in a place of confusion because of the cold. But mostly, I had this sense of peace that I was going to die. And so I began to pray some and think about my parents, and I began to fall asleep. And when I would fall asleep, I'd collapse and fall off this little perch and smack the rock. I had a helmet, and I was geared up. Pull myself back up after whacking my head and waking myself up. I don't know how many times, and I pulled myself up this one time. And as I stood there, I watched my peripheral vision, like a old Porky Pig cartoon, fade to black. My entire circumference of my vision, my peripheral vision, was fading to black rapidly and collapsing like a spotlight on a stage at the end of the show. And I swung my head around, looking in these directions, and the spotlight, the fade to black followed my vision. And I wondered, what is this? I'd never seen such a thing before and didn't understand it. And it happened really pretty fast. And then it just, and I felt myself fall, and I didn't fall asleep. I thought, because I was conscious, and every other time that I'd fallen, I'd become unconscious because I was asleep. But this time I was conscious, and I thought to myself, why am I still conscious? And I didn't feel myself hit the rock. There was no whack. And I thought, what is this? In my whole interior horizon, everything that I could see above me, to the side of me, and down below me, this one large sweep became an onrush from an infinite distance of an intelligence that was amorphous and was non-being like, but rushed at me at light speed or faster and communicated to me directly without language, I'm taking you. And I said to myself, no, you're not. And I put up all of my strength and willpower as if I was trying to fend off a blow. And it was as if I was made of candy glass, and it just plucked me out. No choice at all. And the next thing I knew, I was in a place of timelessness where there were no things. It was a place of non-being where there was no physicality, and I had a consciousness that was the totality of myself. My entire being was my eye and my ear and my mind. There was no separation between any of those things. And I was in an infinite greater darkness that was illuminated, and I could see in every direction all at once to infinity, and it was dark and light at the same time, and there was nothing there. It was emptiness, and I was unafraid. I wasn't trying to be brave. I just was unafraid, and I saw then with my eye self a gigantic portal door gate appear, and I peered through this to this archway that extended beyond sight and tunnel-like, but this sheen and sheer, translucent and transparent flow was the portal itself. And I touched this, and it was alive with life force, and the life force poured into me at the same time. Although I tell this in a sequence, but it's totally timeless. There's no sequence. All of this could have happened all at once or in reverse order. I don't know. I have structured it in a way that makes sense to my thinking, but it's inexpressible, frankly. At the moment of touching this, I heard my name called inside myself from an everlasting distance, the length of my entire being's life, which was much longer than my human form. And the name that was called inside me wasn't Peter. It had I have no way to say it. It is beyond language of humanity. It's something else altogether, but I knew that it was me, and I knew that I was called into being when it was spoken, when I became creature, when this name was thought. And I then knew the length, the long tail of my everlasting soul was the reality of my being, and that the life of Peter was a surface, a sheen, a skin, and at the same time, I knew that I was fully known, and there was nothing about my entire being, in my entire skin life as Peter, that was unknown. And I heard this voice that had no sound, that spoke inside of me. And in this same instance, I knew that I was completely in the presence of the divine, who I could not see but could hear, and knew was surrounding me and inside of me, and said my name and communicated that I was fully known. And then I went through all of the pain and the suffering that I'd given everyone in my entire life, from their point of view, times a million times their suffering that I gave them. It was their suffering plus what they actually suffered, not just what they suffered in their skin. And I experienced their pain from their point of view, plus simultaneously, I experienced all of my reasoning and justifications or emotional choices to cause that pain. And I, in sequence from birth, and at the same time that I was suffering the pain that I had given away, the voice that had no sound was saying inside me, I love you, I've made you, I know you, I've always known you, I've always known you. There's nothing about you that is unknown to me. I made you this way. I love you, I forgive you. Your being of being a human being is what made you behave this way. It's the truth of you is love. It's being in the flesh that makes us hurt each other, human beings. And I was ashamed, not because of what I had done to other people, but because I could see the hem of the robe in the throne room of God, of the infinite love that I was beloved with. I was ashamed because of infinite love, because I was so beloved. I was ashamed for what I had done. And it wasn't because I was upset that I had hurt these people, because I was, but the truth is that I was ashamed because of perfection and my imperfection. And the purity of perfection was beyond comprehension. And I was fully forgiven. And all of that suffering went away, and I was infilled with this combination of all these things that we keep separate. We separate truth and joy and hope and compassion and kindness and knowledge and intellect and understanding and analysis. We separate all these things out, senses, but they were all one thing: beauty and love. And forgiveness, and it was all this infilling of this oneness to the expanded self, because my soul is much bigger than my body is. And when I was dead, it was expansive. And it was infilled with a gift of grace that was undeserved, and left me in a state of adoration, of total devotion. And the more I was immersed in the divine love, the more I loved the divine love. And it became the only thing that mattered to me. And I had no eyes casting backward, looking back at earth. All I had was this beauty and truth, all infilling inside me, that was who I was. It became who I was. And I then, using this no language and no lips and no eyes and tongue to speak, I said, "Am I dead?" And the voice said, "Yes, you're dead." And then I said, "Well, I can't die now." And the voice said, "Why? I want you to stay." And I said, "Because my sister has vanished and my mother is broken and my parents have suffered a great suffering. And I if they lose another child, it'll destroy them." And in that instant of thought, I was swept to see all of Earth all at once, the entire planet, and every single human being on it all at once, and every single human act you can imagine. And every human being had like a veil, like a something they couldn't see through as they went about their day. And the voice said to me, "In the way that I love you now, you know now that I have always eternally loved you this way, and that I always will love you this way. And because of my infinite love, all of your suffering is gone, and you're in this place of blissful beauty, of purity and love and wholeness and healing. And you now know that it's not only you, it's everyone. The difference between you and everyone else here you see is that they're veiled and they can't see because they're in this world. And you know now that they are all my beloved, just as I love you." And then I saw my parents' faces in particular, and I could see the suffering of their life and the suffering they had in the moment that I saw them. And I still couldn't I still couldn't stay, because I couldn't put them through what I knew they were going to go through. And I said I had this other reason. I was in a theater company. We're living on this national tour. I made a promise to the director that I wouldn't get hurt. And I said, and God made no response. And I said, "I haven't gone through the portal yet. Do I have to stay here?" And the voice said, "No, I want you to stay, but you don't have to stay." And I said, "Well, if I go back, can I live my life?" And the voice said, "Well, I'm going to stop for a second and tell you one more thing before I leave. The length of my life was a wink of my eye. That's how fast my entire physical life was. 21 years, that fast. And so in the place of timelessness, all the suffering that's here in this life passes in an instant, and it's over. And all that's left is bliss and beauty. And I brought with me into heaven all of the love that I had ever given to everyone in my life. Dogs and kitty cats and little butterflies and my mom and my dad and my friends and everyone. All of that love. That was my treasure to bring with me. And all of the love that people gave me my entire life was my treasure to bring home with me too. Only it turns out that love that I gave away and that love that I gathered, my treasure, wasn't actually mine. It was God's. And I was a created being made of love. And everyone has this capacity to give to each other the treasure that's necessary for heaven. And that's love. And it's abundant and available, and it never ends. It's this endless flow. It's not only an endless flow here, it's an everlasting flow. And love does not end here. It's sourced from the other side, and it continues there after it leaves here. And so I said, do I have to stay here? And the voice said, no, you don't have to stay here. I want you to stay here. I said, well, if I go back, can I come back here to this beautiful, blissful place of non-being? And the voice said, yes, you can come back here. And I said, well, I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life, and sent me back. And the next thing I had consciousness of was being outside of my body, being compressed and crushed and shrunk and stuffed inside this thing that I live in. And it was painful, and it was painful not only because my body was suffering, and I now had the sense of my feelings returning to me. It was painful because I don't fit in this thing. I'm much bigger than my body form, and it was blinding to come back in. I lost understanding. I lost intelligence. My brain moved. I understood so fast when I was dead and had no brain in the way of my thinking. Now I've got this brain that's in the way of my thinking, and it's too slow, and it doesn't hold enough information, and it forgets things, and it's caught in this temporal world of all thingness. And I'm into this world of thingness, but I'm a thing too. So it's like that principle of physics, where when you look at the experiment, you change the experiment. The Heisenberg principle: you change the experiment when you look at the experiment. And I'm in the experiment, participating in it, and unable to get out of it until I get to go home again. So we self-rescued, and a terrible thing happened the next day that it doesn't add to the story other than give me more post-traumatic stress disorder. We totaled the car when we had a semi on the way home. And I ended up hitchhiking back to Bozeman, and then I went on this theater tour, and I couldn't drive the van. There was 15 passenger van and a trailer and a truck, and I couldn't drive anything because I was a wreck. And I dove back into meditation. I'd been fortunate to go to a Catholic school near a Catholic monastery where the monks had been studying with Sasaki Roshi, who's a Zen master. And long before I got there, he had stopped teaching them, but they were still using the techniques, and passed them on to my religion teacher my senior year, who passed them on to my class. And I became instantly infatuated and began a lifelong practice 3 or 4 years before I died, and found that was my only safety, diving into the oneness. So here I am. I get ordained. I go to divinity school. I get ordained. I continue my prayer practices. I end up working in churches, dealing with human suffering and pain. And in this context, I encountered this woman. I was a first-year minister, an associate minister, and part of my tasks were to go to hospitals and visit the sick. And I was visiting this woman who had some long-term ailment. She was in for a month. And on the third week, we'd been talking about her son who had committed suicide. And I'm going to take that sentence back. I'm still working on that word to remove it from my vocabulary. It's a matter of habit, not truth. Suicide is not a crime. Suicide often arises out of despair. It's more of a medical condition than it is anything else. I've witnessed enough in this life to know that. This young man had killed himself, and the mother was distraught. And I came in this one Thursday because that was my day to visit. And she said, "Oh, Peter, I got something to tell you. He came to me in a dream." I said, Who came to you in a dream, and what are you talking about? She said, I had the most incredible dream. It wasn't like I was dreaming. It was like I was awake, and I could think, and I knew that I was in the hospital. And in this dream that was vivid, my son came to me, and he communicated to me without language that all was well with him, and that he was in a loving and beautiful place, and to fear not. And she was a changed woman after that. I'm willing to bet that among all these people that you know who are participating in this group, that something like that has happened to you or to people you know. The deceased don't always come to the one who's grieving the most. I don't know why that is, but I've seen that. But the deceased sometimes comes to another to give assurance of safety and love. All is well. All has been well. All is well. I'm going to take a little drink of water here because my throat's getting a little sore. So here's the thing about love, and I'm going to use marriage as an example. You get two people. They fall in love. They live together. They share their whole life. They're among the rare people who don't get divorced. They spend their entire lives together. And by the time they're married for 70 years, one of them dies. And in the process of loving each other through all of the struggles of life, they take this amount of love that's inside themselves and they give it like a tentacle into the other person, into the belly of the other person. And they extend out this long tentacle of love that goes into the belly. And then that other person extends out a similar tentacle of love into you. And now you've got this shared experience, this binding, this being bound together of love. And when one person dies, that physical experience is like getting cut off. And here's your tentacle that's dangling out there, not attached to anything anymore. And not only is it not attached, there's this empty hole inside of you where the other person's tentacle was. And then you get this grief that is the twin sister of love that comes with every single relationship we ever have. There's always going to be with love grief for someone. And it's a terrible thing to experience, but know this, and it may be hard for you to believe me, but love never, ever ends. The grief that you feel is proportionate to the love that you shared. If you're grieving greatly and you're suffering greatly, it's because you love greatly. And that experience shows the reality of love exists in this world post-mortem. And I can tell you personally that it exists post-death. And that love is this thing that is unending and eternal. And even though you grieve for the children you cannot replace, for which there is nothing you can do except for step by step by step, you can know in your heart that you are still loved by this person, by your child, because it doesn't end on the other side. That love comes back here. It's all wound together in this web of oneness that's imperceivable here, but everybody feels it here. That's why it hurts so much, because love comes with its twin. I am hoping to go home. I wait to go home. I've been praying to go home. I stay here. I had a second near-death experience in 2015. I died of a widowmaker heart attack. I live in a rural place, as I said earlier. I live an hour and a half on a good summer's day from the cath lab, and I died along the way. And I had a chance to go home again, but because of circumstances in my family, I turned my back and came back here. Not because I want to be here, but because there are people here who need me. And I believe that's probably true in your life too. That even though you've had great suffering and great loss, there's someone here who needs you to get on and get up and put breakfast on the table and earn the paycheck and continue on even when you don't want to. I am not from here, and neither are you. This is a temporary place. We pass through and we go home. And we don't end. No one ends. Souls are everlasting. Your children have not ended, they're just not here. And on the moment of your death, you'll find yourself transformed in that, what Paul calls the twinkling of an eye. And you'll be caught by the beloved. And your wounds will be healed. I look forward to that for myself. That's what keeps me going every day. I don't know how long I've been talking here. I've not been paying attention to that.
You're doing great, Peter. Yeah, please continue if you'd like.
Sure. I just put up the chat so I can see it there.
Yeah, I just want to interrupt you for a second. If it makes you feel more comfortable, in the upper right corner, there's a toggle switch for gallery view. So if you want to see everybody's face, if you click that, you'll see everyone's face.
I would like that. I switched it over the other way simply because I thought it was better for recording.
No, I've got it controlled from here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I would have done that a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to see your faces. It makes it lots easier instead of talking to a lens. When I was a young pastor, I made my first terrible error as a near-death experiencer. I think I'd been in the church. I was the interim associate minister, and I might have been 27. And as a near-death experiencer, I'm not afraid of death at all. And I wait for it. And it doesn't freak me out so much. I mean, it's hard to die. I've watched a lot of people die. And that's a terrible thing. That's a very terrible thing. But death is so often peace for the one who's passing. But I didn't know all that stuff. And when members of the church, but sort of errant members of the church, they weren't really participating, I got a call to the church, and the senior pastor said, "This is, you take this one." It's like, okay. What it was a 16-year-old came home. We were living in this swanky suburb outside New Haven, Connecticut. The kid came home, found dad's brand new car, found dad's keys, took dad's brand new car, totaled dad's brand new car, came home, took dad's .38, and shot himself.
Oh.
So I go into this place and I sit down with the family and I think to myself, okay, these people are in terrible grief, but he's okay. And I told him, he's okay. I know he's okay. But I couldn't tell him why I knew that, because I wasn't telling anybody. And I realized at that point that not having experienced what they went through, I had no idea. And so that's what I'm telling you all tonight. I've been through a lot in my life, we all have, but I've never been through what you've been through. And I apologize to all of you for all of us who don't understand the level of your grief. And I hope that those of us who don't allow you space to grieve in the way that you do, whether it's in the grocery line, when you see a picture or you hear a song and you cry. And at least for me, where I am, when I see that kind of stuff, I think to myself, she needs to cry. She's grieving something. And so for all the times that we don't do that to people who are suffering grief, I want to apologize to you all for us. And encourage you, as you probably already know from groups like this, that you have to grieve. You have to. That's my story. I can talk about lots of other stuff, but I don't want to say babble if I don't have to.
Yeah, well, I think we've got some questions. I want to say, first of all, that was amazing. That was fantastic. Very, very inspiring and obviously heartfelt. You said you had an opportunity twice to stay, but you chose to come back. That seems kind of unusual from what I've heard about near-death experiences. Do you know why you chose to come back?
Yeah, I do. The first time was for love, and the second time was for love.
Mm-hmm.
It was to alleviate some suffering. The first time my mom had this breakdown. My sister had vanished, and we for a year didn't know whether she was alive or dead. And then it turned out she was alive, and but was only writing to us once a year. And my mother went through this long period of time. The tape loop in her head was, "I'm a failure as a mother. I'm a failure as a mother. I'm a fail. What did I? My fault. My fault. My fault." And I knew that if they lost another child, my mother would break into a million pieces. It was hard enough to hold her together at the time as it was.
Mm.
And then, even though I knew in the end she was going to be beautiful, just like all the rest of us, healed and loved, but I could see the length of time she would live, and I knew that in those intervening years without me there, her life would have been suffering that was, from where I was, unbearable for her. And the second time, my daughter graduated college, but also married her childhood sweetheart before he went to Afghanistan and went through terrible, terrible things. Came back with moral injury, became abusive, and they had a baby, and she left him. And just as I was dying, she left him and was coming to our house. And I, as a pastor, a church pastor, I've never made much money. I live pretty well, but I don't have a deep well to go to. And if I died, they were going to lose the house. And no house, nowhere to live with the baby and my daughter and my wife. My wife works, but you know how that goes. So as I was loaded on the gurney, and I'll just say that I ran 5 miles the day, 5K the day before, and I was at yoga class. So my dad almost died of a heart attack. My sister, who vanished, actually did die of a heart attack when she was 58. I don't know. I have to look that up. Anyway, I was 56, and as I got loaded on the gurney, they told me I had 100% blockage. They shot me up with a decoagulant. They gave me a 3% trickle through. I refused opiates for my pain or any painkiller because I'm allergic to opiates or sensitive. They make me sick. And because I got 30 years of meditation, I can control my pain when I'm in meditation. I can look at my pain and separate myself from my pain and not suffer the pain, even though it's still there. And so I figured I'd do that all the way to the hospital, as I had an elephant standing on my chest. And as I got loaded on the gurney, so I'm clear-headed is what I'm saying. As I got loaded on the gurney, my 23-year-old son showed up, leaned in, squeezed my hand, looked me in the eye, said, "I love you, Dad." And off I went. Come to find out later that the doctor had told him to say his final goodbye to me because he thought I was going to die on the long ride to the hospital, because it's an hour and a half at summer traffic, and I was pretty sick. And so lo and behold, on the way to the hospital, the paramedics are saying over the radio, "We're losing him." And I'm not on morphine. I'm just meditating. So my eyes are shut, but I'm focused. But I hear this, and I look at the woman, and she's a paramedic, and she's like, "Oh, well, he's awake. And then I closed my eyes, and when I closed my eyes, the same angel of death, I don't know what else to call it, was there welcoming me home and filling my entire horizon. And this time wasn't pulling me, but was inviting me, and come with me. And I started to go. I went. And as I went, I thought, well, this is a very different process. Maybe I should think about this. So I turned my eye back inside myself, and I thought about my son. I love you, Dad. I thought about my daughter and my granddaughter, and their need. And I thought, I can't leave these people if I could stay here. These people, they need me. What's going to become of them without me here? Especially my granddaughter. And so I turned my eye back, and death had receded. And when I looked back at death, as death rushed back down to me to welcome me. Same communication. Come home, welcome home. And I just turned my eye away and chose to stay. And, now it's 2 years later. They lived with us for 2 years. They moved out 3 weeks ago. And so we raised a granddaughter in the house with my daughter, who's in graduate school and working, getting a 4.0, by the way, 5 classes in, because she's a smarty pants, and got a good job and earned enough money. We supported them, and she saved up money and paid off the debt that this guy accrued, and got her back on her feet again. None of that would have happened.
Wow.
So, I'm waiting to go. And in the meanwhile, trying to bring as much light into the world as I possibly can, because I want to make sure that I say this really clearly. I am not the light. Okay. I am not the light. And I say that clearly because people make mistakes that they think that the messengers are the beings of light, and we're not. Only God is the light. I've spent my entire life trying to polish my inner mirror to get out of the way, to let more light in, out of my own selfish desperation and need to be in the presence of the divine. And a side effect of that is that it shines through into the world. But that's not my purpose. My purpose is to turn my eye back onto the divine and stare at it as often and as much as I can. And I'm not after any spiritual gifts. I'm not after healing people. I'm not after walking on water or, whatever, or making myself project out of my body. I only want that one thing. That's all that I want. And all those other things, if God wants to give me the gift of healing, excellent. I'd love to be able to do that. Or better yet, the gift to be able to project the light of God's being into another, for letting them have a glimpse of the divine self, and then find some self-assurance and hope of life eternal, because then they can see with their spiritual eye that they are not who they think they are, that they are beloved. They were before they came here. They are after they leave here, just like your children are. And that you are like a photon of light, not the light itself. So that's if you're on a spiritual path and you want God, then don't go after anything else. Don't pursue any other part of this spiritual life. Go after the one thing, because the one thing, you get everything. When you get you find the one thing, you get everything. You go for the parts, you get the part, but you might not get the whole thing. And the whole thing is the light itself, the love. And that's really the operative for me. Is, I spent my life as a Christian pastor in the United Church of Christ. But really, I know that the life is all about the currency of love. Love is the currency of life. It's everybody. It's built into human beings. Every single human being who loves anything, anyone, maybe not anything, because of selfishness in loving money, selfishness in loving, your BMW. I'm sure I like my car and I try not to wreck it, but I'm not in love with my car, which isn't a BMW, by the way. That's just saying that. The love is the commerce. Everybody, it's built into every single human being on the planet, with the exception of maybe sociopaths. And that's probably just a biological block for them, and that it doesn't come through their filter. But everybody can love everybody else, or somebody else, just one person. That's all that's all it takes.
Wow. You mentioned that during your first near-death experience, that the being of God said to you, "You won't." He said, "Can I go back and live my life?" And he said, "You won't live your life." What do you think that meant?
Well, it took me most of my life to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure that out. But what I think it means is that God didn't want me to come back here. God's like, yeah, you can stay. And like I said earlier, I use Christian language. You want to use think the word source or beloved or whatever word you want to use. Islam has 99 names for God. If you want to see a list of names for God that can help you understand the breadth of the divine being, look up the 99 names of God that Islam has, because they're great. They express all these different components of the divine being. So I use the word God just because I'm in that culture. Ineffable. Anyway, my life was over. My life ended, and that's the message that I got. I was supposed to stay. I want you to stay. There was no you have to go back, or well, you can think about it. You can stay or you can go. I want you to stay, but if you want to go, I'll let you go. That's different. And I think that my life ended. That was up from that point on, everything changed. My parents would have lost their kid. My dad's architecture firm would have closed earlier. As it was, it closed anyway because I didn't go to graduate school in architecture. I went to divinity school, and eventually the firm closed because I wasn't there. And my trajectory entirely changed. I didn't go to school in Georgia. I went to school in Connecticut. I didn't become, a designer of skyscrapers with my dad, which was what we wanted to do. He had never done it, but that's what we wanted to do. Instead, I, was running vacation Bible camp, dealing with death and dying, which is really what my forte was, and writing. So my life has been completely different. And I guess really to answer your question, Brian, is that I have a singular boss and I work for God. Churches made the mistake of thinking that I worked for them, and I don't. I don't work for anybody other than God. That's my boss. And I can't shut that off. It's not, I don't have any choice in this matter. It's like something is on in me and I can't not look at it. It's like the eye of Sauron and in Tolkien's books, that evil eye, only it's a good eye, but it never goes away and it never shuts off. It never blinks.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic. We've got a couple questions. Julie would like to make a comment. She said, I had a dream visit from my daughter who also died by suicide. It was different from other dreams. Days before, I had been begging for my deceased daughter for one more hug. In this dream, I was walking in a gray room, and suddenly she grabbed me from behind and held me for what seemed like a few minutes. I could smell her scent and knew it was her by her very presence. And she says, thank you for sharing your story.
Did you feel some sort of assurance and healing from that? Did you walk away from that with a new understanding of yourself?
Julie?
Absolutely, Peter. It was, I've been fortunate to have a lot of good medium readings, which has been very helpful to me. I'd say it has been the most helpful besides support groups. But that dream just let me live on. It let me continue to live because I knew she was still alive.
Then I pray for all mothers and fathers who've lost children to have such a dream.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, a lot of us have. Peggy asked, do you still feel like you're connected to God? She asked this earlier. I think that's pretty clear to us that you do.
It's more like I'm on the other side looking here than it is like I'm here looking to the other side. Yeah. It's like the majority of me didn't come back. And it's a very disconcerting experience. It's not like what you think it might be like. It's disorienting.
Yeah. Tracy asks, is there a hell?
I went through a hell. A hell of my own creation, of the suffering that I caused other beings. but it wasn't a permanent place. But I didn't know permanence from impermanence. I was in eternity where there was no time. So I don't know what to say about that. But I did find in my reading, Catherine of Genoa, 1500s of Genoa, Spain, of Genoa, Italy, pardon me. She in a mystical experience was taken into the divine being, into heaven, and went through what she calls a purgation of the divine fire of love, the divine purging fire of love. And that was my experience. It was a divine purging fire of love. And it wasn't, I wasn't suffering eternally. I was being cleansed of the weight that I couldn't bring home. I had to leave things behind. I couldn't bring them with me. And the only way to get rid of them was to boil them off with fire. Skim the dross off the top of the boiling metal pot. And I was left able to be infused. So I can't tell you whether anybody else has had other experiences, but that was mine. And I've spent most of my life reading as broadly as I can through the ancient literature to find reflections of my own experience. And Catherine of Genoa, definitely the divine purgation of love, the fire of love. I want to say also something I forgot to tell you, is that the soul is real. You know, it's not like this mystical, magical, fake thing that you believe in. It's has this a physical reality. And you've been in the presence of people where you've felt their energy. You feel their soulness. Or say, for instance, in the moment of ecstatic passion, you feel melting into the other person. The soul is a real thing. And I'm kind of hoping in the 21st century that science develops the technology as we examine scientifically what consciousness is and how it's attached to the body, that they develop a tool to see what we feel radiating from other people. That real thing is not only what you are, it's what your child was and is. And that thing is everlasting and does not end. This thing here, this is the sleeve that we're in. And it's just not who you are. You're passing through here.
Yeah. We have a comment from Irene I want to read to you. She says, "Thank you for sharing your story. It's a tremendous help to all of us knowing that our children are safe and happy, surrounded by love, and that we will be with them again in the blink of an eye."
Amen.
So we can never hear that too often. Pamela says, "How was the second time a very different experience?"
Second time was a very different experience. It was gentle. I had no fear at all. The first time I was fearful, and I was being driven by this sort of, I think of it as a mammalian sense of survival. It was so deep inside me to survive that every ounce of every fiber of my being was propelling me toward living. But the second time, I was completely unafraid. And I actually self-diagnosed. So I'm in this yoga class. I was supposed to go sailing. I'm a sailor. The fog rolled in, so I couldn't go sailing. And I was like, what am I going to do? Saturday morning, I'll go to yoga class. I've been a yogi for 30 years. I go to yoga class, and the teacher, who's a friend of mine, because it's summertime, it's packed, she sets me up in the door jam. So I'm in the door jam, and I'm doing yoga, and it's really hot because she likes this hot yoga, which I'm really not into. But I'm like, God, I'm really, really, really hot. How can I be so hot? I better lay down on my mat. And I'm like, geez, I'm really, really hot. Oh, my heart hurts. Huh, that's weird. I sit up a little bit, like, oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Left arm, sweating, trouble breathing, heart hurts. I think I'm having a heart attack. I go outside, which is right next door. So it's a very small place. And I go outside, lie on the grass. I'm like, I'll just lie on the grass for a couple minutes. I'm like, oh, no. I'm having a heart attack. And so I thought, I'm going to get in my car and drive to the urgent care center. So I lean up and I'm like, oh, no, can't do that. Lay back down again. I'm just going to stay here till somebody finds me. Finally, the teacher comes out and she says, oh, Peter, what's going on? I said, well, I'm having a heart attack. She says, Nah, you can, you? I'm like, yeah, I'm having a heart attack, and go get my friend who's in there and drive. She can drive me to the urgent care center. Took me a while to convince her too. I get to the urgent care center, and I'm not afraid the entire time. That's really the biggest difference. Is I'm completely cool. I got a level head. I'm not in a panic. I know what's going on. I'm in charge of the situation. I'm the one who's running the show, and. And when I was in the ambulance meditating to control my pain, I was completely unafraid. And turns out later, my wife had also been in the urgent care center, and when I was there, and of course at the hospital afterwards. 6 months later, over dinner, I say to her, "So, what'd you think that day?" She said, "You've been praying for your death for 30 years. I didn't, and you've been saying first legitimate opportunity you get, you're going. So don't wait for me, honey. So I thought you were going to go. I'm really surprised that you chose to stay." It was gentle the second time. Expected, I guess.
Wow. Wow. Carol asked, did you get any understanding of reincarnation?
I think so. There was this part of when I was looking shown. When I say when I was looking, I wasn't really like looking around at this point. I was being shown, and I was seeing what was being shown to me. And I saw what I describe metaphorically as this long tail of my everlasting soul from the moment of my being brought into being as a creature created by the Creator, by the name that I was being called, that brought me not only into being originally, but also was the self that I am. I don't know if that makes sense, but I could see that this Peter person was a skin that I was in, but I also could see these, like, I don't know how to describe them because I couldn't really see them fully, but they were like slices in my everlasting soul, or penetrations out, or demarcations that seemed to be many of them and regular, and they seemed to be simultaneously existing with this Peter person.
Wow.
And so but I've thought a lot about reincarnation, all that stuff. And I'm going to go back to the same thing I said before. And that is, don't worry about it. That's really not the important thing. It's because if you're asking the question about reincarnation, what was I when I was another thing of flesh? You're asking the wrong question, because that's still here. So I was, this or that. And that's not what you really are anyway. That's what you were incarnated as. Why are you looking at it? Is what I think. And so if it's your everlasting soul in heaven that you're after, that's where you look. All the rest of this stuff is wonderful. I mean, it's great. I'm not opposed to any of that stuff. People can pursue it all they want. But as for me, I just want the oneness, and let all the chips fall for where they may. And I'll tell you, I don't really want to come back here. I've kind of like had it. If I have to come back here, I guess I would if I have to. And besides, why would I come back to here? This isn't the only planet. There are 23 septillion galaxies, and each of them have, a quintillion stars, and many of those have life forms on them. Why here? Why do I want to be in this universe at all, though, is really my question to myself. Why would I ever want to come back here if I can be propelled toward the divine oneness?
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Wow. Julie asks, how can we know that we're connected to God? How did you know with such certainty? Was it because of your NDE?
It's because of my NDE. One of the things that happened is I was a Catholic Christian when this happened. I was actually a charismatic Catholic Christian, a bit of a backslider, don't you know? But I was a Christian. I was raised Greek Orthodox and Roman Catholic simultaneously, and I was a church-going kid and believed. But when I died, belief was taken from me. I'm not a believer now And that's really the hardest thing for most people who aren't like me to hear. I don't believe in God. I don't have any doubt that God is real, because for me, God is real. God is the only real that there is. And this is the place that's not so much. This is the place that isn't what we really are. And so my confidence and assurance isn't anything about me. It's only because the divine made me that way now. Erased my, it's like I had a capacitor, and that capacitor was taken out. And not only was that capacitor taken out of my transistor board, it was erased. Those little solder holes, they were taken away, and away went belief and faith and doubt. And in its place was this divine connectedness that left me with knowing that I'm known by the knower. I'm not like all knowing. I don't know. I just know that I'm known. I know that God knows me intimately, every single piece of me, all the time, everywhere, every day, never not. And so as for what you can do to feel God, it's the tool set that I pursued through study of mysticism is the tool set that's available to everybody. These folks, these men and women, they weren't near-death experiencers. They were mystics, and they developed tool sets that made them more susceptible to divine grace. It's not that they propelled themselves to become mystics that had divine experience of ecstasy. It's that they made themselves available to the possibility. And that's what the tool set does. And the tool set globally is meditation. There's like 500 permutations of that. There's the Tai Chi. There's Zen and the art of archery. There's Sufi dancing and Catholic mass, and all these forms of focused concentration on the divine all open the window inside you. It's persistence, it's dedication, and it's doing it even when you don't feel it. And it peels away and peels away and peels away and opens ever wider a channel for the light to flow through. It's a practice of getting out of the way of the divine. And if it didn't work, it wouldn't be handed down in every single global culture that there is. Generation after generation after generation. These tools get handed down because they work. And it's not really a matter so much of what you believe that they work. It's that the tool itself works. You don't have to believe that a hammer works. You know that it does. And you can be in Tokyo and pick up a hammer, even if it's shaped a little differently than the hammer you pick up in Istanbul, but both of them whack the nail down. And that's if it's God you pursue, if it's God that you want, find a meditation practice. And it's not just a focal practice of a mantra. It's an uplifting of the heart to the divine. Because the mantra, the prayer, those things are important to control the monkey mind, what the Zen Buddhists call the monkey mind, which runs around and runs around and runs around. It focuses the mind, but even the prayer falls away, and you become the prayer. When you fall into the place of silence and an emptiness inside yourself, you become prayed. You become the prayer. Even if it's only a moment, that's enough to last, to feed us for a lifetime. And whatever tradition that you're in, that's the advice that I got. Okay, so I stayed in the Christian church. Why did I do that? I went because when I came back and I died, I took this class at UMass Amherst called, in the comparative religion department, Mysticism East and West, which involved going to the same monastery that my Catholic church was associated, my Catholic high school was associated with. Anyway, I went to the professor one day and I said, look, I have this friend who died, and he doesn't know what to do with this, but he's trying to find God, and he's lost because he knows he's not from here anymore, and yada, yada, yada. And he says to me, is your friend Jewish? And I say, well, yes, actually, he is Jewish. And he says to me, well, then he should stay a Jew, because Judaism has a tradition of mysticism. And if he stays a Jew, then he's not going to have to learn another culture and another language and another way of thinking. All he has to do is mine his own religion for the tool set that's existent there. I'm like, oh, okay. So I stayed a Christian, and I read around in Taoism and the Vedas and all the rest of the stuff. I read broadly, but my particular practice stays within the context of my culture, just because it's easier for me. And so, whatever your culture is, whatever your tradition is, you can find within it the mystical tradition. And I don't mean incense and crystals. I mean the tool set that's been handed down for generations that works. And all you have to do is pick it up and practice it. And that's really the hard part. The practice itself is simple. The practicing of it is more difficult.
Yeah. Wow. We have a few more questions. I think someone said, I think I would ask Peter, what is the one thing that would surprise us the most when we cross over?
That you're not your body. That's like that. I was astounded to see myself as I am. And that's the first thing. And I guess the overwhelming thing is that God is love, and that love pervades all things. And that love is the message, love is the answer, love is the action, love is the communication, love is the tool for everything. It's what makes all things exist. And even though this world is full of suffering, and it's this duality of suffering and love is still bigger. Love is eternal, and this duality is not. And my body is not who I am, it's where I live. And I inhabit it, but so do you. It's just the difference might be that I know that and you don't, but that doesn't mean that you don't inhabit it. Yeah. It just means that you haven't seen it yet. And the moment you die, you're going to see that. And dying itself can be terrible, can be slow and painful, it can be quick and surprising. It can be a shock. It can be lingering. It can be a process of letting everybody know that you have enough time to tell them that you love them, or it can be overnight or in a flash. But in the end, at the very end, when you make the transition, you're welcomed into beauty. You're brought home to the divine self. Just look at the light. Just keep looking at the light your whole life. Just keep swinging your eye around to it. That's all it really takes. It's built into us. It's not complex. And religion are tools. Terrible tools, create wars, kill people, but there are tool sets within them, because every single religion began with a single person who had a divine experience. And then it was codified and organized, and the parameters are built, but it all begins with each individual. It was made with the divine in them. We're made with this thing inside us to help us find it. But it's like who we are.
Wow. Did you see family members while you were on the other side?
My mom and my dad's faces, but they were still alive. But I wasn't looking for anybody. The totality of the divine love was more than enough to satisfy my soul. I just didn't want my parents to suffer. But in terms of seeing anybody else, my beloved dog, or my grandfather who died on my first birthday after playing with me of a heart attack, I didn't see him either. But it was perfectly okay, because all beings of love are contained within the oneness of the divine. It was like seeing everyone, only more so. Does that make any sort of sense?
Wow, yeah. We have a couple more comments. I don't want to keep you too long. I told you it'd probably be about an hour and a half. One question, you talked about having a choice to stay. Do you think our children, who are young adults, were given the choice and decided to stay?
I think some of them might have been, and some of them might have not been. I mean, sometimes the body, there's no way you can go back in. There's nothing to come back to. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it was just their time. And sometimes I think that the beauty is so perfect. There's so much perfection that why would you want to come back?
Mm.
I mean, I wanted to come back because I wanted to help my parents, but not because I wanted to go back to Earth, because Earth, you know, is a terrible place. It's full of love and beauty, but it's also full of suffering and pain. And, you know, history isn't written about the beautiful things in life. It's written about all the suffering. And that's because there's a lot of it. So if you could escape your suffering, why would you come back?
Yeah.
And plus, I knew when I was on the other side that even though I chose to come back to alleviate some suffering of my parents, that even if I hadn't done that, ultimately it was all going to be well for them anyway. I was just trying to it was like throwing them a life ring to keep them afloat. But eventually they were going to be plucked out of the ocean by, you know, a teleportation machine and brought into the 31st century, as opposed to me, you know, tossing them a cork life ring, which is what I was basically doing, and which I am still doing, trying to keep them from suffering as much as they would have been. But I wouldn't have come back if it wasn't for that.
We have another question. Could you tell us more about how you helped the family where the son totaled his father's car and then came home and then shot himself?
Oh, I got fired from that. I sat down with the parents and I said something like, I can see your grief is great. I understand you're suffering some because but you know, your kid's okay. It's like, your kid's he's great. He's not suffering. He's really good. And they got pissed off and they told the senior pastor, and senior pastor, who's great, man. He's I love this guy. You know, he said very kindly and gently to me, he said, Peter, you kind of messed that up. I'm going to take it from here.
Mm.
So I was done with that because I was a dope.
If I understand correctly, you didn't share your near-death experience for quite a while, right?
No, I no, for 20 years I didn't. It's, you know, it's kooky. Okay. I come from a rather rational family and faithful people, but still we're pretty rational, and it's crazy. And I didn't have any language for it, and I never met anybody like me, and I didn't even know what to call it. And so I kept it to myself, and I lived out my ministries, you know, as a minister at all these churches. And then there was this huge embezzlement in this that predated my arrival. So I'm at this church for 11 years in this swanky resort town where I still live. And long story short, there was two sets of embezzlements, one that occurred before I arrived and one that occurred while I was there. And the one that occurred while I was there was colluding with the one that occurred before I arrived. And they had a power dynamic and a power structure that prevented examination. And because I work for God and I'm very difficult to control in an authoritarian society, because, you know, I smelled a rat and went after it with all my might. And they tried to defrock me. They tried to fire me. They tried to ruin me financially. These were all powerful, you know. One was a CIA spy from behind the Iron Curtain. One was vice president of like Exxon Mobil. These were powerful, intelligent, capable, manipulative people, and I was their target. And eventually what happened was we finally got rid of the thief, who was the treasurer and also the financial secretary. And we brought in a brilliant woman, and she did forensics, and we found the thief. And when this was all over, because the church really gave me a super hard time, the whole body was turned against me because of these people. But in the end, I hadn't done anything wrong and saved them. They came up to me and said, "Oh, you know, we're so sorry for what we did to you. And how did you keep your faith while you endured with us?" And this guy, as a deacon, came up to me as I climbed into the pulpit one Sunday morning. You know, "We're really sorry. We can't believe that you endured what you did, what we put you through. And how did you keep your faith?" And I thought to myself, okay, it's time to tell them I don't have any faith. That's how I did it. I did it because you know, I'm indestructible in terms of my connection to the divine. It's not here. You can crush me and kill me and take me apart, and you can't make that thing go away. I can't make it go away. It's not for lack of trying. I tried to make the thing go away, but I couldn't do it. So I found the better choice was to dive into the oneness as opposed to try to run away from it. It was all consuming. It was never ending, just completely disorienting. And so I turned to pursue it. And so that Sunday I told everybody, and that's the Sunday that I came out. Then I got recruited into television shortly thereafter and ended up in this other show, running this show, and sending the same message out every single morning during the morning news. So this program ran during the morning news on 2 NBC stations in Maine. I had 2 minutes every morning to bring a spiritual message to 100,000 people every single day. And so I did it through story, and it was the same beaming out the light that I was trying to beam out before. By that point, though, I had come out of the closet, and eventually I came out to my TV audience. And but I did it slowly through stories, brief little stories, and eventually I came out with a book, and I decided that I had nothing to lose anymore. I didn't need to pretend. I was always faking it in the pulpit. I was always lying from the pulpit, saying that I was a believer when I wasn't, and that was eating me up.
Wow. Wow. We were curious as to what year you had your first NDE. What year?
1980.
1980. So that
March.
was before NDEs were very widely known. So
yeah, I was at Yale when my wife came, who was working in. She was a researcher in the public health department at the medical school, and she came home one day with a book, which was Life After Life, and she said, "I found this book in a bookstore. I think it's you." And so I read this book as like, "Oh my God, I think it's me." Wow. And the intro was by Kenneth Ring, who you probably all know his name, but he was at a university right up the road, like an hour up the road from me. So feeling bold, I tracked him down and called him up and caught him in his office and said to him, "You know, I read the book, and then I read your foreword, and I think I'm one of them. Can I tell you my story, and can you confirm or deny? You know, you get 5 minutes." And then, 10 minutes time, I told him my story, and he said, "Yep, you're one of them." And for the first time, now it's 1986, I knew who I was. I knew it was like, oh, there are others like me. And
wow. Just a couple more things. You earlier referred to committed suicide, and you changed your language with that. That's something that Helping Parents Heal has been working on also. Because the word committed is, it relates to a crime. So
right.
One of the terms that we're using is completed suicide. So someone attempts suicide, and we use the word completed suicide. So that we're just offering that something you might be able to help you.
Completed suicide.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good language switch because it uses similar consonants, and that's an easy slip in there. That's good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And one thing I wanted to interject. Earlier, you were talking about spiritual gifts, and if you could have any gift, you'd like to be able to shine the light of God into people to let them know who they truly are. And I want to tell you, that's what you're doing right now. This has been just fantastic. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate your transparency. And I know it's been very healing for me, and I think I speak for everybody that's on. And we're getting a lot of comments in the chat that people are just like, this has been fantastic. So I really, really appreciate this, Peter.
Thank you, everybody. And I saw that I saw as it was going by that I've been to somebody's club at a book club last year. Who's that person?
Is it Janine?
Janine Quigley.
Yeah.
Hi, Janine. Oh, hi, Janine Quigley.
Janine, do you want to speak?
Good to see you.
Hi there. And I'm available for book clubs.
It was awesome.
Well, thanks.
Well, Peter, I told you I'd keep you for about an hour and a half. It's actually coming right up exactly at an hour and a half right now. So I want to respect your time. But again, I can't thank you enough.
Well, if you ever want me to come back again, this is this is what I do. So I'm available because I work for God and this is the job.
Yeah, it's cool. That's so cool. I'm telling you, I just love it. Our tradition is to unmute everyone, let everyone say good night and thank you. So we're going to do that. So thanks a lot, Peter.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, Brian. Good night, everybody.
Thank
God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Beautiful.
Thank you, Peter. I really appreciate it. I wonder
you.
if you might be interested in coming to speak at an AFSP group,
I don't know what that
which
is,
is
but yes.
suicide prevention.
Suicide
The
prevention.
Association for Suicide Prevention.
Sure.
And I think it would be very helpful to everyone who's experienced that.
I'd like to be considered.
Wonderful. Thank you again for sharing your story. It was very helpful.
You're welcome. Glad to.
Peter, I will see you around, man. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, we'll see you on Facebook,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.
Peace and
Thank
love.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.